Tonight's story is how medieval millers stole grain without getting caught. A slow, creaky glide through the shady arts of medieval milling, where theft was as common as bread and twice as subtle. Hey guys, tonight we sneak into the gentle churn of a medieval watermill where the wheel turns slow, the shadows stretch long, and the flour dust never quite settles. You step softly along a muddy path in your half-dyed shoes, the kind made from stitched leather and damp regret, until the roar of water crescendos ahead. The mill is squatting by the river like an old toad, wooden, damp, and faintly creaking with secrets. It smells of oats, mildew, and possibly mild dishonesty. This isn't just a place to grind grain. It's where whispers ride the breeze, and corners are just dark enough to make grain sacks evaporate. And tonight, you're the newest customer, dragging your heavy bag of barley to a man whose smile is 3 parts friendly, 2 parts calculating. Welcome to the world of the medieval miller, equal parts mechanic, magician, and minor criminal. He eyes your sack with theatrical boredom, gestures you inside. His tunic is patched, but the gold ring on his thumb says he's doing just fine. You follow into the gloom, ducking past a beam that nearly clocks you. You're now officially in the club. The grinding wheel groans to life like an old beast waking up. You're standing ankle-deep in husks, listening to grain become gold. Dust, if only a bit of it, ends up in your own flour sack. You probably won't survive this as a profitable peasant. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell me, where are you listening from? What time is it in your corner of the world? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The mill itself is a work of rustic engineering. Water from the river is funneled down a wooden channel to strike a massive wheel, which in turn powers a set of grinding stones inside. You can feel the vibration in your knees. The building sways just slightly, as though sighing with each rotation. You watch as your grain is hoisted by hand or a pulley. If the miller's feeling generous and dumped between the heavy millstones, the grind begins. You're told your toll will be taken, a small share for the service. Reasonable, right? But here's the game. No one's quite sure how big that small share really is. In theory, it's a fixed portion, maybe a 16th or a 12th, but who's counting? Not you, not the man without his spectacles, and certainly not the village reeve, who's usually either blind, bribed, or blissfully indifferent. Mainstream historians tell us that millers were officially regulated, their fees capped by local customs or manorial law. But here's your reality check. The same folks writing those rules often had a hand in the mill's profits. Convenient, isn't it? Meanwhile, your miller, let's call him Arnulf, is spooning flour into your sack with a curved scoop. He coughs, bumps the table, and whoops, some of it spills to the floor. Terribly sorry, he mutters, but his eyes flick sideways to where his dog waits patiently, not for food, but as part of the act. That spilled flour, it'll be swept up later, sieved, and sold. One fringed tidbit. Some mills had secret chutes, really, little wooden slides that carried flour through the wall and into a hidden compartment. Millers built these channels like medieval magicians, relying on architectural trickery to stash their gains. You sit on a barrel, watching the wheel go round. The smell of scorched husks lingers as the air thickens with damp flour. Arno whistles a tune no one else knows. It's suspiciously cheerful. Historians still argue whether most millers were truly criminal or just perceived as shady due to their isolation and technical knowledge. You recall someone saying once, maybe it was your cousin, maybe it was a guy in a pub, but it sticks with you now. The miller was often one of the only literate men in a village, oddly enough. He could read weight tables, maybe even some Latin. To the average villager, that was basically witchcraft with a measuring scoop. Outside, the river burbles on, uncaring, a goose honks somewhere in the mist. And inside, Arnulf ties your sack with a friendly grin and a twine knot that might be 1 grain lighter than you'd like. He pats the bag, hands it to you, and says, next time, bring oats. They're friendlier. You nod and thank him, stepping outside with your precious sack. It's heavy, maybe not as heavy as it was, but still heavy enough that as you walk back up the hill, away from the sleepy mill with its wheel groaning in the night, you wonder just how much flour it takes to make a miller smile that smugly. The answer, just a thumbful, more than you'll ever notice. The next time you visit the mill, it's raining. Not a dramatic storm, just the slow, soaking drizzle that seeps through your cloak and into your bones. You squelch down the hill with another sack, this time wheat, a little finer, a little fussier on. When you arrive, Arnulf the miller is already out front, pretending to adjust the water wheel. He gives you a grin like he's been expecting you since breakfast. You nod, pass him the sack, and he gestures you in with a hand motion that somehow says, "Welcome back. Don't expect miracles." Inside, everything smells faintly from grain, wet wood, and the ghost of someone else's lunch. Today, you want to understand how the toll is taken. Officially, it's all above board. You give your grain, the miller grinds it, he keeps a small portion as payment. But you've heard rumors in the taverns some millers use scoops with false bottoms, others keep an extra thumb on the scale. And you're pretty sure Arnulf has more than 2 thumbs. Spiritually speaking, the measuring tool of the era is a wooden scoop, rounded, rustic, carved, smooth by time, and maybe by deliberate wear. It's supposed to be standard size, but millers, clever souls that they are, often hollow out a little space beneath the scoop space. You can't see it unless you hold it up to the light, and, even then, he might just cough and turn away. Arnulf demonstrates his toll-taking with performative precision. "For the abbey," he says with a chuckle, scooping a portion into his own sack. "For the stones, another scoop. And for the rats, who are very well fed this season." You're not sure who's being shortchanged. Probably you, but it's delivered with such flair that it almost feels like street theater. And besides, the toll varies based on what you're milling. Barley, cheap, rye, slightly better wheat, fancy stuff. The toll might be 1 or 1/8 or 1/4. Depending on how gullible you look that morning. One historical record from a 13th century English manor describes a miller who was caught using a double-bottomed bushel, a hollowed measuring bin with a full space that kept extra grain hidden beneath the visible portion. Genius, shady, but genius. As Arnulf talks, he rubs his hands together theatrically, flour billowing off like snowflakes. His apron is white from shoulder to hem, his beard dusted like a poorly iced cake. "See this," he says, pointing to the scoop. "Inherited from my father, and him from his father. Family tradition, right? And probably hollow since the First Crusade." You ask him if everyone does it. He gives you a long look, as if considering whether you're trustworthy or just too tired to report him. "Let's just say," he murmurs, "some tolls are heavier than others." Fringe tidbit time. Some especially cheeky millers trained their dogs to sit near the customer's sack and subtly nudge it while no one was watching. Why? To jostle a bit of grain loose from the top, which would then be cleaned up later. That's not folklore. That's rural criminal innovation. You eye the mongrel curled by the fireplace and wonder if it's part of the team. Meanwhile, your flour is still being ground. The great stones upstairs turn slow and steady, the rhythm both soothing and slightly threatening. Arnulf adjusts a lever to regulate the pressure between the grinding surfaces. Too much, and your flour scorches. Too little, and it's lumpy. He's muttering numbers to himself under his breath, like a man calculating not weight, but opportunity. Historians still argue whether the toll system ever truly worked as intended. Someone once wrote, "You're starting to understand why. The math is always flexible when one party holds the scale, the scoop, and the legal monopoly on grain grinding." In fact, being a miller was often the only legal option. Peasants weren't allowed to grind their own grain at home. It was considered theft of service or, worse, interference with feudal revenue. You couldn't even use a handquine in some places without risking a fine. It was grind here, grind nowhere. Arnulf ladles the final flour into your sack, ties it shut with a practiced flick of his wrist, and hefts it toward you. It's warm from the friction of grinding, surprisingly heavy. You wonder how much lighter it might have been if you'd looked away for even a second longer. Before you leave, he taps the scoop against the side of the mill table. A small clump of flour falls out just enough to remind you that every measurement has a margin that always favors the house. As you step outside, rain still dripping from the thatch roof, you turn back and ask, "How do you know how much to take?" Arnulf grins. "I take what feels right. If it doesn't feel right to you, you're welcome to try the windmill 3 villages over, but I hear their toll includes a sermon." You shoulder the sack, feeling the pull in your spine, and begin the slow walk home, shoes squelching again. Behind you, the wheel turns on. The scoop clatters into a bin. The dog stretches and yawns. And somewhere in that flickering shadow of the grinding room, a little more than your grain has just disappeared. You return a week later, not because you particularly enjoy the company, but because your larder's low, and well, grinding your own grain is still highly illegal. Today, the mill is quieter. No one else is here, and the dog is nowhere to be seen. Maybe he's off on flour reconnaissance duty. Inside, the air is warmer than usual, heavy with the scent of ground rye and smoke. Arnulf isn't up front this time. You call out, your voice vanishing into the low murmur of grinding stones. Above, then you hear it, a rustle, a clunk, a suspicious she-thump from behind a stack of empty sacks. You step around the pile, and there he is, Arnulf, halfway through sliding a small wooden panel back into place in the wall. He freezes, flour on, his hands, guilt on his face, and says, "Structural maintenance." Sure it is. Your eyes drift to what he was tucking away, a narrow wooden chute, just wide enough for a trickle of flour. It angles through the wall, likely into a hidden box on the other side. Ingenious, devious, dusty. Yes, you've just discovered one of the oldest tricks in the miller's book, the secret compartment. It's not glamorous, no gold coins, no glowing treasure. Just a trickle of stolen flour, moving quietly away from where it should be, accumulating one scoop at a time. You say nothing. He shrugs, dusts off his hands, and says, "Come on, let's get your grain started." As you follow him back into the main room, you start noticing things. That barrel by the wall, too light to be full. That second sack under the table, tied differently. There's a rhythm to his movements now, a practiced sleight of hand with sacks, scoops, and the shuffle of boots on flour-covered floors. You start to suspect that the entire layout of the mill is part of the quirky historical tidbit. In some areas of Europe, millers built false-bottom sacks not for transport, but for sorting. Grain from customer A on top, stolen flour from everyone else underneath. If anyone inspected the bag, it looked like fresh, honest work. Genius with just a sprinkle of villainy. Offer to help, half curious, half suspicious. Arnulf raises an eyebrow but nods. He hands you a burlap sack, and instructs you to fill it from the flour chute. It's warm and soft, pouring out like powdery silk. You scoop, fill, tie, feels easy, feels too easy. Then he shows you how to use the scales. Except the scale doesn't quite balance correctly. The left pan seems suspiciously heavier. You look closer. The hook on the chain has a small pebble wedged inside, subtly tilting the weight, just enough to justify keeping an extra handful for waste. You glance at him. He just shrugs again. Wind changes the weight, so does mood. You're starting to see the mill for what it is, not just a machine, but a performance. Every beam and bag has a place, not just for efficiency, but for misdirection. It's like walking through a magician's workshop where every grain of flour is both real and imaginary. Arnulf takes a break, sits on a worn stool, and pulls a crust of bread from his coat. It's fresh, thick, probably baked with flour that never belonged to him. He offers you a piece. You take it, chew slowly, and think, this tastes like theft. Not bad, really. He starts telling stories. Once, he says, a reeve came by to inspect the toll bin. So I cleaned everything spotless, filled it with stones and chaff. He poked around, found nothing, and fined me for not having enough flour to steal. You laugh through your mouthful. It's not a joke, but it is funny in that medieval sort of way, where everyone loses except the guy holding the scoop. Historians still argue whether villagers genuinely believed all millers were thieves, or whether they simply accepted it as the cost of doing business. He muses, like a tax on hope. That hits you harder than you expect. You think of the stories passed down, how your uncle claimed a miller once skimmed enough flour to feed to families through winter, or how another used to sprinkle extra bran into the final product to bulk it up, passing off thin flour as something hearty. There's another rustle behind the stack of sacks. This time, it's not Arnulf hiding flour, it's his nephew, maybe 12, sneaking a handful from the secret pile. Arnulf doesn't scold him, just nods. It's part of the training. You help finish up your own milling, keeping your eyes sharp. The chute still works. The scoop still lies. And somewhere inside all of it, you begin to admire the ingenuity, twisted though it may be. As you leave, sack on your back, a bit lighter than you'd like, Arnulf leans in and says, "You learn a lot about people from how they count grain. Most of us learn to subtract first." Outside, the wheel turns on, slinging water like a lazy cat. The river murmurs. You walk back up the path, flour dust clinging to your sleeves, and wonder what else has secret compartments in this village. Probably the church, definitely the reeve, and maybe, just maybe, your own coat pocket by next harvest. You return in late summer, when the air hangs heavy with the scent of ripe fields and simmering suspicion. The mill looks the same, leaning ever so slightly, as if weighed down by its own secrets, but something's different. Arnulf has visitors, and not the usual peasants with donkey carts and fraying sacks. No, these are men in leather jerkins, with polished boots, and the kind of faces that haven't seen hard work in a while. You linger by the side of the mill house, pretending to check your grain sack while listening with one ear. Their voices are hushed but urgent, and the words you do catch, tribute, shortfall, inspection, make your stomach twist a little. These aren't customers, these are lord's men. And Arnulf, he's laughing, all friendliness and deference. You've never seen him bow so deeply or smile so hard. One of the men hands him a sealed document, which he tucks into his tunic with hands that only tremble slightly. Then they're gone, their boots crunching back down the river path. He sees you, nods, and motions you inside. As you shuffle past the doorframe, you feel it again. That quiet performance. Today, the mill is extra tidy. Tools in neat rows, sacks, all labeled, the floor even swept. Too clean to be real. You're in theater now. Arnulf, you ask, what was that about? He just waves a hand. Rent collectors. Overpaid and underhungry. You know better. Here's the thing no one likes to say aloud. Most manorial lords benefited from the miller's theft. Sure, officially, they forbade cheating, but in practice, every stolen scoop helped pay the mill's hefty rents. Every bit of skimmed grain meant Arnulf could meet impossible quotas and still keep the wheel turning. In fact, some manorial records show lords quietly encouraging dishonest tollsers, long as their cut came on time. When millers failed to pay, then it was called theft. Until then, just smart accounting. Historians still argue whether millers were independent craftsmen or financial puppets tied to their lord's whims. You recall hearing once, you're starting to lean toward the puppet theory. Just puppets with scoops instead of strings. Arnulf begins grinding your grain while you sit on the windowsill, watching the water spin the wheel like a slow dance. The mill groans, the stones churn, and everything feels too quiet. You notice a new box near the weighing table. It's ornately carved, out of place in this otherwise rough-hewn world. Arnulf catches your eye. Don't touch that, he says, flatly. Of course, now you want to touch it more than anything. Patron's gift, he mutters after a pause. Said I needed a safer way to store the toll. Right, safe. For whom? You imagine the relationship. Arnulf steals from the peasants, the lord steals from Arnulf, and maybe someone else is stealing from both when no one's looking. A fringed tidbit from a dusty old chronicle flickers in your memory. One tale of a lord who had a secret staircase built into the mill wall so he could sneak in at night and monitor toll collections. Did he ever use it? Doubtful, but he liked having it, just in case his trusted miller became too clever. Arnulf coughs, jostles the sack under the chute, and you hear the unmistakable sound of a coin clinking where only flour should be. What was that? Button, he says. Sure it was. There's attention today. The usual dance of petty theft and mutual understanding is offbeat. Arnulf is sweating more than usual. You see it in the way his hands shake just slightly when tying off the flour sack, in the way he keeps glancing toward the road, as if expecting the boots to return. He leans in low as you hoist your sack. Careful, he whispers. There's a fine line between clever and dead. You nod, feeling the weight on your back, and not just from the grain. Outside, you pause by the water channel, watching it flow steady and clear. You remember hearing that some millers in France use the stream not just for power, but as a hiding spot, burying coins or purloined grain in waterproof pots beneath the current. If someone searched the mill, nothing was inside. It was all drifting beneath their feet. You wonder how many rivers are hiding treasure, how many water wheels are turning because someone, somewhere, skimmed just enough to keep the gears oiled and the landlord smiling. Today, you feel the full triangle of medieval economics press against your ribs. The lord, the miller, and youth a peasant in the middle, always paying just a bit more than anyone admits. As you walk back up the hill, the wind picks up, rustling the hedges. The sun glints off something on the path behind you, probably nothing, maybe a button, or maybe a coin slipped from a nervous hand trying to hide it too quickly. You leave it after all. It probably belongs to someone higher up the ladder, someone with sharper shoes. A few weeks later, the gossip hits your ears before the flour does. The miller's been confessing, sort of only not to the reeve, not to the lord, and certainly not to any peasant. No, Arnulf's been going to the village priest. You will find this out in the most medieval way possible, by overhearing two old women at the well, discussing the sinner with flour in his beard. One of them crosses herself dramatically. The other just mutters something about stealing God's bread and spits dot by the time you make your next delivery. You can feel the tension thick as dough. The village is small, people talk, and when the topic involves someone everyone already suspects but can't quite prove guilty, well, the stories get creative. Inside the mill, Arnulf seems quieter, not tired, just less smug. The wheel creaks, the stones grind, but he's subdued. No jokes, no winks. Even the dog, who usually does a little flower pod dance when sacks appear, is asleep in the corner like he's sworn an oath of silence. You ask him how things are. He doesn't meet your eyes. "I've been to Father Gerald," he says. "Needed to clear some things." "You wait," I told him. Arnulf continues, "that I might have weighed a few tolls in my favor. Taken more than my share." You nod slowly. "Did he absolve you?" Arnulf laughs, sharp and bitter. "He asked for a third of it, in coin. Turns out, Father Gerald is no fool. The church isn't blind to the mill's quiet profits. In fact, many parishes in medieval Europe owned their local mills or collected fees from them. This gave priests both a moral platform and a financial incentive. Not a great combination if you were hoping for genuine absolution, but mainstream fact. Many monasteries operated mills as revenue generators, often renting them to local millers who paid hefty annual dues. And in return, the church looked away unless the dues ran late. You ask if he gave the priest what he wanted. "Of course," Arnulf says, "cheaper than hell." There's an edge to him today. His motions are sharper, like he's daring someone to accuse him outright. He starts grinding your grain before you even ask. But the rhythm is off more impatient than usual. Historians still argue whether these confessions were acts of conscience or just economic transactions dressed up. In Latin, you remember reading somewhere. Today, it feels like the latter. You help him sweep while the flour collects, and you start noticing the smallest things, like how he glances at the little wooden crucifix nailed above the doorway with something between resentment and superstition, or how his fingers twitch every time he ties off a bag, like he's calculating how many coins are owed to which master this week. Whispers about Arnulf are swirling outside too. Some say he shorted a widow during Lent. Others say he sold extra flour to the tavern keeper under the table. A few claim his dog has a better diet than the village orphans, and still, no one turns him in. Because here's the strange thing about village morality. Everyone knows he's stealing, but no one really wants him punished. If he goes, the next miller might be worse or a stranger. At least Arnulf cheats with charm. He sometimes leaves a bit extra if your child is sick. He once gave flour for free when the Reeves barn burned down. A quirky tidbit: in one old record from Flanders, a miller was fined not for stealing but for stealing unequally. The Reeve accused him of favoring certain villagers over others. The injustice wasn't the theft itself, but the unfair distribution. Arnulf seems to understand this balance better than anyone. "You have to steal evenly," he mutters while sweeping, "or you'll get a knife in your ribs at harvest." You're not sure if he's joking. He tells you he's been attending mass more often. "Just in case," he says. You ask if he's worried about being excommunicated. "Nah," he grins. "Priest said, my soul's already discounted." Then he offers you a deal: less toll on your grain, in exchange for keeping quiet if anyone comes asking questions. You nod, not because you agree, but because it's what people do. The quiet pact of mutual guilt. Outside, the air smells of smoke. Someone's burning damp wood in a hearth. The mill's wheel keeps turning, oblivious. The dog finally lifts its head, sniffs the air, and goes back to sleep. You haul your flour sack home, thinking of the strange morality you just walked through. The priest wants his cut, the villagers want fairness, the Lord wants profit, and Arnulf wants sleep. You wonder if he ever gets it. That night, by candlelight, you measure the flour. It's heavier than usual. He did give you extra, and for some reason, that makes you feel a little uneasy. Your next trip to the mill isn't to grind grain, it's to watch a pig testify in court. No, really. Word spreads through the village like wildfire wrapped in gossip. A trial is being held just outside the church, and Arnulf is the accused. But so is his pig. The reason? Fraudulent consumption of ecclesiastical grain, which is just a sanctified way of saying, the pig ate flour stolen from the church's tithe. You don't ask questions, you just go. The crowd gathers around a makeshift tribunal. Father Gerold, the reeve, 2 stewards, and a scribe, who looks like he'd rather be drinking. Arnulf stands to one side, flanked by his pig, which has been rather thoroughly dusted in flour, likely for dramatic effect. This isn't as absurd as it sounds. In medieval Europe, animals were occasionally tried in ecclesiastical and civil courts. Pigs, goats, even insects, charged with everything from property destruction to murder. And though most of these trials were more theatre than justice, they served a purpose to reassert moral order when regular punishment felt insufficient. So now you stand under a pale sun, squinting as Father Gerold reads aloud the charges: theft, fraud, gluttony, directed at both man and beast. Arnulf doesn't flinch. He's wearing his good tunic, the one with only 2 patches, and he bows just enough to suggest humility without actual guilt. The pig snorts. A sack of flour evidence sits between them. You recognize it. Arnulf must have used one of his extra bags, the ones he normally hides behind the grain bins. Witnesses are called. A shepherd says he saw Arnulf carry 2 sacks to the rectory one evening, then leave with 3. A spinster claims the pig often eats better than she does. A small child, confused but enthusiastic, says, the miller feeds secrets to his animals. Number 1 knows what that means, but the reeve nods solemnly. A fringe tidbit. In one 14th century case in Savoy, a pig was hanged for eating a baby. The pig had legal representation. Really, the miller's pig here is far more innocent, but unfortunately, it doesn't have a lawyer. Historians still argue whether these animal trials were symbolic rituals or genuine legal attempts. You recall, watching this unfold, you suspect it's a little of both and a convenient way to shame Arnulf without invoking actual execution. Arnulf is allowed to speak. He doesn't apologize. Instead, he launches into a monologue worthy of any back philosopher. If my pig ate holy flour, he says, then surely it's now blessed from the inside. Would you deny this beast's salvation? He gestures dramatically at the pig, which, helpfully, chooses that moment to relieve itself. The crowd laughs. Father Gerold does not. You glance at the reeve, who looks deeply uncomfortable. He knows Arnulf cheats, but so does everyone. And if they punish him too hard, who will run the mill? Who knows how to keep the wheel from jamming, the stones from burning, the river from flooding the lower floor? So the verdict comes with all the ceremony of a real judgment, and all the sting of a mild slap. The pig is sentenced to penance. 1 week in confinement, a small shed behind the rectory, and no scraps for the duration. Arnulf is to pay a fine, 1 extra sack of flour per month to the church for the next season. His name is added to the parish's book of cautionary sinners, a list mostly made up of millers, midwives, and anyone who's ever sold watery ale. Later that day, you find Arnulf sitting on a stool outside the mill, whittling a piece of wood into something vaguely scoop-shaped. The pig is curled beside him, looking entirely unbothered. How's prison treating your assistant? You ask. Arnulf chuckles. He's sleeping through his sentence. Then, quieter. That was the best theatre I've seen in years. They made me give up a bit more flour, but I'm still ahead. You nod. You know he's right. The fine is manageable. The shame is temporary. And if anything, the spectacle earned him more sympathy than anger. He tosses the scoop in progress into a barrel and stands. Funny thing, he says, I actually did give that sack to the priest, but it was the one with weevil dust. You both laugh. In the fading light, the mill looks peaceful again. The water wheel turns steadily, each creak echoing like a breath. Inside, the grindstones wait, patient as always. A few chickens pick at the dirt by the doorway. The dog returns, licking something off its paws. You sit on the step next to Arnulf, not saying much, just listening to the rhythm of things. The wheel, the breeze, the pig softly snoring in ecclesiastical disgrace. It's strange how justice works here. Not by laws, not really, but by balance. You steal a little, confess a little, pay a little, joke a little, and life goes on. You wonder if that's how most people survived back then, not by being honest, but by being just dishonest enough to stay interesting. You rise, stretch, and prepare to leave. Arnulf waves as you go, already shaping another scoop from the next piece of wood, one for measuring, one for show, and maybe one for the pig. Autumn has arrived, and with it, the smell of apple rot and damp wool coats. Leaves crunch underfoot as you walk the now familiar path to the mill. Sack of mixed grain slung over your shoulder. But today, the scene is different. Arnulf isn't at the door. In fact, Arnulf isn't anywhere in sight. Instead, a young woman in a flour-smudged apron and a braid thick enough to choke a donkey stands in the doorway, arms crossed. She eyes you like she's measuring you for a coffin. "You're late," she says, "though you're not. Grain's heavy. Hope your coin pouch is too." This is Elswith, Arnulf's daughter. You've seen her before, usually hovering near the ledger or feeding the pig. But today, she's in charge and clearly loving it. Inside, the mill feels different, more efficient, somehow. The usual clutter has been rearranged. The toll box is centered neatly, the scales balanced. Even the sweepings have been swept. The whole place hums with a feminine kind of disorderly, but with the distinct possibility of being slapped with a wooden ladle. You set your grain down and glance around. "Where's your father?" "Sick," she says, or maybe pretending to be, conveniently ill when the Lord Steward shows up. You get the sense this isn't her first time running the show. As she works, you notice her technique. Fast, clean, no unnecessary movement. She weighs everything herself, and she does it in plain sight. But here's the twist. She talks through the toll as she takes it. 1/16th, she says, eyes locked on yours. "For the wheels where?" 1/16th. "For the stones." 1/16th. "For the church." Then she winks. "And maybe a whisper for me." You grin. This isn't theft. This is performance art. Quirky tidbit. In some rare village records, women, millers or milleresses, were fined more frequently for toll manipulation than their male counterparts, but also praised for better accuracy, possibly because they were better at keeping ledgers, and much better at lying politely. You help carry a sack to the side. "You run this often." "Since I was 12. Father pretends I'm just helping." She snorts. "I've kept this place from collapsing more times than he's remembered to pay the abbey." She pulls a lever, adjusting the millstones. "You know why people don't trust millers?" she asks. "Because the math is always off. You take just enough to make people doubt themselves." You nod. That tracks. Historians still argue whether women in medieval trades had more leeway or more scrutiny. You recall from some lecture you didn't finish. But in this mill, Elswith seems to have both, and she's using it well. Later, while the flour settles, she offers you a mug of warm cider. You sit near the chute, steam curling in the air, and she tells you about the widow at the next village over, another woman who ran a mill after her husband's unfortunate accident involving a frozen wheel and a very bad sense of balance. "Smart woman," Elswith says. "Kept her ledgers, one for the reeve, one for the truth." You raise an eyebrow. "She also baked the best bread in the district." Suspicious, right? The two of you laugh, and the cider makes the chill in your bones a little less demanding. A while later, another customer arrives, a man with an uneven beard and eyes that never look up. Elswith greets him like an old friend, but you notice the small change in her tone, a shade more serious, a whisper less friendly. As she measures his grain, you watch her slip something, just a spoonful, into a separate bin. Quietly, skillfully. You say nothing. After he leaves, she shrugs. "He shorted me last spring. I'm just collecting interest." You suddenly realize something. Elswith is fair. She cheats. Yes, but in a kind of righteous way. She remembers debts, favors, gossip. Her mill ledger might as well be a ledger of justice. "Do you ever want to run the mill full-time?" you ask. She snorts. "Want? No, but someone has to. Keep the flour from turning to dust." You both watch the stones turn for a while. The rhythm of the mill is different when she's here, sharper, cleaner, less sentimental. The pig stays out of the room. Even the dog looks like it's reconsidering its life choices. As you prepare to leave, she hands you your sack. It's full, heavier than expected. She sees your surprise and smirks. "For your silence," she says, "and because you laughed at my jokes." Outside, the wind whistles through the trees, scattering yellow leaves across the path. You begin the walk back, sack on your back, cider warming your chest, and a new kind of respect settling in. Arnulf might be the face of the mill, but Elswith, she's the teeth. The following spring, everything changes. The watermill still stands, tired and damp by the riverbank, but there's a new whisper among the villagers. Wind. Not the kind that rustles leaves or carries cooking smells from chimney to chimney, but the kind that turns blades, sharp and creaking, up on the hill. You see it for the first time on your way back from market, a wooden tower, tall and strange, with sails as wide as fishing nets, and a ladder so steep it makes your knees ache just to look. It doesn't hum like the watermill, it groans, and as it turns, slowly, noisily, you realize something. This is competition. Windmills are the future, not yet common in your parts, but spreading. No river required, no frozen wheels in winter, no swampy mill floors and flooded sacks. Just air, canvas, and a decent gust. You visit Arnulf a few days later. He's sitting in front of his mill, sharpening a chisel with more frustration than focus. His pig, now twice its previous size, and presumably twice as repentant, snoozes nearby. Seen the monstrosity on the ridge, he grumbles without looking. Up. You have. Historians still argue whether windmills disrupted local economies instantly, or if it was a slow erosion. You'll recall vaguely from somewhere. Standing here, looking at Arnulf's scowl, you're betting on erosion with extra splinters. Inside the mill, things are more cluttered than before. Elswith isn't around today, and it shows. The floor's unswept, the ledges are closed, one of the grinding stones is chipped. The dog is chewing what may or may not have once been part of a broom. Arnulf sighs. Lord's nephew built the windmill, claims it's more efficient, says it'll standardize grain yield. What it'll actually do is put me out of business. You believe him. The windmill doesn't need water flow. It doesn't clog in storms. It doesn't creak unless it wants to creak. It doesn't smell like river mold and crushed rye. But most importantly, it doesn't have a known thief at the helm. Arnulf lowers his voice. I've been thinking about diversifying. That sounds modern, dangerous. Selling brand to the stables, renting the grindstones to the traveling preacher, hosting God forgive me weddings. He groans. Imagine saying vows next to a toll bin. You do. It's a weird mental image, but not the weirdest thing this mill has seen. Quirky tidbit. In some parts of the Low Countries, windmills were occasionally used for non-milling purposes, storage for salted fish, hide tanning, and even amateur astronomy. One enthusiastic friar once mounted a telescope to the windmill's rotating top. It did not end well. Arnulf is clearly spiraling. He talks about licensing the pig for village festivals, about grind-your-own grain experiences for bored nobles' children, about installing a second wheel. You nod politely through it all. Then you ask the real question, will you switch to wind? He stiffens. No soul in those things, he says flatly, just a tower and a breeze. A mill should smell like wood rot and wet wheat. You think of Elswith, so precise, so modern in her quiet way. She'd probably switch to wind in a heartbeat and stall a second chute, just in case. The toll today is light. Arnulf is distracted. Maybe he's lost the heart for skimming. Maybe he's saving energy for the inevitable showdown with his breezy new neighbor. As you shoulder your sack, he says, let me show you something. You follow him to the back wall, past the usual clutter, where he lifts a loose floorboard and reveals a tiny compartment beneath. Inside, a small sack of coins, neatly tied and labeled Elswith don't spend yet. He smiles sadly. She need it when the wind wins. You leave feeling conflicted. The watermill has been your constant muddy, shady, full of whispers, but you can't ignore the sails on the hill, turning lazily in the afternoon breeze, clean and sharp and full of the future. By midsummer, villagers are already whispering about the windmill's tolls. Lower, faster, more fair, they say, though no one's really checked. Still, you notice the lines are shorter at Arnulf's. The sack weights are lighter. The pig snores alone. The future isn't just coming, it's creaking into town, one turn of the sails at a time. And in the dust and river mud, Arnulf and his secrets slowly begin to drift toward the past. By the time harvest season arrives, things have curdled. The village feels tense in that particular way only medieval villages can, like bread just starting to sour. You hear it in the tone of voices at the well. You see it in the way people clutch their sacks tighter on the road. There's no official shortage, not yet, but flour isn't stretching as far as it should. Bread loaves are smaller, Gruel tastes more like hope than wheat. And then someone says it. The Millers are at it again. You try to ignore it, because honestly, when aren't the Millers at it? But this time feels different. The windmill's been shut for repairs, meaning the Lord's nephew probably broke something important while boasting. And with the water levels low from a dry summer, Arnulf's wheel turns with all the enthusiasm of a hungover mule. It's bottleneck season. You arrive at the watermill to find a line of customers out the door, each more irritated than the last. The toll has gone up officially due to stoneware and river sluggishness, unofficially, because desperation is the miller's favorite weather. Inside, the mill smells worse than usual. Something has rotted. You think it might be the atmosphere. Elswyth is running the grind today, and she's not smiling, not even a smirk. She weighs your sack and doesn't say a word, just stares at it like it personally insulted her ledger. Arnulf is in the corner, arguing with a villager whose beard is damp with tears, or sweat, possibly both. You catch phrases like short wait, rat holes, and blessed curse upon your grindstone. Later, the villager storms out. Arnulf sighs and turns to you. Rough day, he says, as if you couldn't guess. People say you're cheating more than usual. You reply quietly. Arnulf just shrugs. They say that every year, but this year they believe it. And there it is, the difference. Quirky historical tidbit. In several medieval towns, grain riots were triggered not by actual famine but by perceived injustice at the mill. If people thought they were being robbed, sometimes that was enough to spark a full-blown uprising. Broken millstones, burnt toll bins, and one truly unfortunate pig roasted in effigy. You eye the sack Elswyth's filling. It looks thin, very thin. You lean in. You're skimming, aren't you? She doesn't flinch. A little. But only from those who shorted us last winter. It's not the best moment, you point out. No, she says, but it's the last moment. Later that afternoon, you hear shouting from the hill. A group of villagers has gone to the windmill not to grind, but to accuse. They blame the Lord's nephew for diverting the best grain to his storerooms. Whether it's true doesn't matter anymore. The riot begins not with torches, but with a rock through the new mill's window. By dusk, the sails have been hacked down. The ladder is ash. The gears, shattered. Back at the watermill, Arnulf watches from the doorway, chewing a stalk of barley like it might tell him what to do next. I suppose that's one less competitor, he says, but you see the worry in his eyes, because the windmill was the future, but his mill is now the only mill, and with that comes scrutiny. No more blaming new blades or unfamiliar tolls. He's it. That night, villagers gather in the churchyard. There's talk of inspecting every toll bag, of forcing transparency, of appointing someone to oversee measurements, maybe even rotate who runs the mill each week. Historians still argue whether such reforms ever actually worked. Someone once muttered over ale, likely not, but the threat of reform, that's powerful. 2 days later, the reeve visits Arnulf with a sharp-eyed clerk and a heavy scale. You watch the inspection from a safe distance. The reeve samples toll portions, checks the scoop sizes, and counts sacks. He finds nothing illegal but a lot that's questionable. The final judgment: the mill will remain in operation, but tolls must be standardized. Arnulf says nothing. Elswyth nods once. Not in defeat, but in recognition, like she's been waiting for this. Later, you pass the mill and see Arnulf dragging an old sack into the woods. Not for storage, for burial. Some secrets are lighter in the ground. He catches your eye and says, "Maybe I overplayed it." You nod. He adds, "But they never missed a meal, not once." You shrugged. Until now. The next week, things start to shift. Toll bins are marked. Scoops are checked. A ledger is nailed to the wall, and villagers are invited to watch the weighing. It's clumsy, it's slow, but it's honest, or close enough to it. Elswyth writes names in the ledger with precise little letters. Arnulf still watches. The wheel, but without the old glint in his eye. The pig snores louder than anyone, and the mill survives, for now. It's late autumn now, and the mill smells more of damp wood and memories than flour. The riot has passed. The inspections have come and gone, and Arnulf, one sly, always smirking miller looks ... smaller, not in body, but in spirit. He moved slower, checks the stones more often, keeps to himself. There's no trickery in his tolls anymore. At least, not the kind you can spot with a casual glance. You arrive early. mist still curling around your boots, and find him sitting on a stump behind the mill, sipping something warm from a chipped clay mug. He doesn't look up when you greet him, just pats the stump beside him. "Remember when I used to take a thumbful from every sack?" he asks without preamble. You nod. Now I weigh everything twice, and people still scowl. There's a heavy silence between you, filled only by the sluggish turn of the water wheel. It groans like an old man trying to rise from bed. Arnulf glances at the mill. Ellsworth runs most of it now. She's got a knack for not making enemies, which is, I suppose, a talent. She does. She's introduced neat rows of labeled bins, colored twine to mark family portions. She's even trained the dog to bark once, for rye, twice, for barley. You suspect the dog is just guessing, but it's good theater. The mill's reputation has stabilized, though it will never shine. Too many years of flour just slipping away. You ask Arnulf what's next. He shrugs. "Maybe I'll build bird traps, or teach the pig to sing." The pig grunts in response, as if insulted by the suggestion. Then he leans closer. "Want to see something?" "Of course you do." He leads you inside, up the narrow ladder to the rafters. You duck under beams, avoiding cobwebs and one deeply offended pigeon. At the far corner, tucked behind a beam, is a hollowed-out nook. Inside it, a small, cloth-wrapped bundle. Coins, a few silver, a few copper, and one intricately carved wooden scoops, so thin it's practically a joke. "My last trick," he whispers. "I was going to plant it in the Reeves bag. Let him find it, let him wonder." You grin. "It's ridiculous, it's reckless, it's him." "But I didn't," he says. "Didn't seem funny anymore." Historians still argue whether the decline of the dishonest miller came from justice, or just better record-keeping. You remember, but standing here, dusty and slightly off balance in a cobwebbed attic, it feels more like exhaustion. The age of clever theft is ending, not with a gallows, but with a shrug. You climb down, and outside. Ellsworth is measuring grain with her clean hands and cleaner conscience. She waves. She inherit the mill, you know that now. And maybe, in time, she find new ways to bend the rules, but bend them gently. Arnulf walks you partway up the path. "We used to be storytellers," he says. "Each scoop had a tale, each toll a secret. And now," he looks toward the windmill ruins on the hill, "now, everyone wants clarity, even if it tastes like dust." You shoulder your flour sack, heavier than in the old days, and thank him. He nods, but doesn't smile. Not quite. You pass the pig, snoozing under the eaves. The dog lifts one lazy eye, and the mill creaks behind you. Old bones still holding. It will survive. Maybe not forever, but longer than you thought. Because in the end, the mill was never just wood and wheel. It was trusty and worn, patched, but still holding together like an old flour sack. And for now, that's enough. As the wheel turns slower and the shadows stretch longer, you start to feel the weight of centuries settle into your shoulders, heavy but familiar. The grindstone still hums, somewhere in the back of your mind, a soft, sleepy rhythm that matches your breathing. You picture the mill, now silent for the night. No tolls, no tricks, just quiet. The sacks rest in neat rows. The floor, swept. The dog, curled into a warm bundle near the coals. And the pig, snoring like a lullaby. Outside, the river moves gently past the mossy stones. You hear it lapping, in slow intervals, like it's breathing along with you. Leaves drift past, golden and brown, spinning in little circles before sinking into the current. Ellsworth's lamp flickers in the upstairs window, casting a soft amber glow across the mills. Old beams. Somewhere inside, a scoop rests unused, honest, still, and Arnulf, maybe, sits on the back step, sipping something warm and sweet, eyes closed, listening to a world that has finally stopped expecting him to cheat it. The village is quiet now. Bread is baking again. The ledgers are balanced. The grumbles are softer. And in your own chest, something relaxes. You've walked this road long enough. You've smelled the damp, heard the lies, watched the flour fall. Now, the sacks are full, your shoulders are tired, and the sky has turned the softest shade of grey-blue. So let it all slow down. Let the water wheel turn just a little more. Let the flour settle. You're safe. You've made it through another season of secrets, and for now, you can rest. End of script. Sweet dreams.